Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by Smithville Fiber Internet, streaming TV, home security and automation in Southern Indiana. More information at smithville.com. Maller Grodner Attorneys, providing legal services to clients and the community. Understanding, expertise, results. Bloomington and Indianapolis. LawMG.com. IU Alumni Association, connecting IU's network of alumni and sharing the Indiana spirit through scholarships, advocacy, and volunteerism. Alumni.iu.edu. IU Center for Rural Engagement, extending IU Bloomington resources to improve Hoosier lives in partnership with communities and organizations. Rural.indiana.edu. And by WTIU members. Thank you.
Coming up on Indiana Newsdesk. State health leaders are begging Hoosiers to be patient as they finish vaccinating healthcare workers and determine who will be next in line.
I want to stress that we are moving in a very intentional order of eligibility for vaccine. We want to ensure that we have enough vaccine before we open up vaccinations to additional groups.
The governor lifted the pause on elective surgeries this week, but extended the statewide mask order and restrictions on crowd sizes for another 3 weeks.
While there's an executive order out there that goes 3 weeks, we're going to be reviewing this tomorrow and the next day, whether it's a holiday or not.
And the coronavirus dominated the news in 2020, but there was also a presidential election, protests over justice and racial inequality, and the appointment of a Hoosier to the Supreme Court. Coming up, you won't want to miss our look back at the biggest stories of 2020. Those stories, plus the latest news headlines from across the state, right now on Indiana Newsdesk. Welcome to Indiana Newsdesk. I'm Joe Wren. Well, state health officials are continuing to focus vaccination efforts on frontline health workers and residents in long-term care facilities. But as Ethan Burks reports, the state hopes to have updated guidelines next week indicating who will be next in line for vaccines.
More than 75,000 Hoosiers have received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccine, with most of the inoculations going to frontline health care workers. The state is telling hospitals to verify that they're giving the vaccine to the people identified as being most in need right now.
We continue to focus our vaccination efforts on our frontline health workers because they are at the greatest risk of exposure.
Weaver says by the end of the week, Indiana will have received 146,000 doses of the Pfizer vaccine and 152,000 doses of the Moderna vaccine.
While it appears that we have a lot of extra vaccine, that really isn't the case. We received a sizable initial shipment of vaccine, but our weekly allocations will be lower going forward.
More than 110,000 Hoosiers have scheduled appointments to get shots next week, and CVS and Walgreens have started administering an additional 40,000 doses for long-term care facilities.
I want to stress that we are moving in a very intentional order of eligibility for vaccine. We want to ensure that we have enough vaccine before we open up vaccinations to additional groups.
The state has created an online dashboard that tracks how many people have been vaccinated and will be updated weekly with the latest vaccine information. Weaver says in the next week, the state will be taking a look at the data and the number of doses available to determine what types of people are eligible for a vaccination.
What is the risk for serious illness and death in that population? What is the risk of exposure to COVID-19? What is the risk of exposing others, especially vulnerable people? And how much vaccine do we have available? And what is the safety and efficacy of that particular vaccine for that population?
And in the meantime, Weaver says no vaccines will go to waste, as local health departments should be on standby for more doses. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Ethan Burks.
Hospitals across Indiana can once again schedule elective surgeries. Governor Eric Holcomb announced 3 weeks ago that hospitals must halt non-emergency surgeries through January 3rd. Now the governor says after talking with hospital systems and seeing slight improvement in COVID-19 hospitalizations, he's ready to lift the ban.
But we monitor these numbers again every day, every week. And so while there's an executive order out there that goes 3 weeks, we're going to be reviewing this tomorrow and the next day, whether it's a holiday or not.
Holcomb's latest executive order extends gathering restrictions in counties experiencing the highest risk of COVID spread. Nearly half of the state is in that worst category. This week, the state recorded 2 new milestones. More than 500,000 Hoosiers have now tested positive for COVID-19, and the state set a new single-day record of new COVID-19 deaths. The state has confirmed about 8,000 total COVID-19 deaths since the start of the pandemic. Well, every time this year's Indiana football team reaches a new height, the achievement is followed by the first time since 1967. Pat Bean looks back at the 1967 Hoosiers, still the only IU team to play in the Rose Bowl.
The year was 1967. The U.S. had nearly 500,000 troops in Vietnam. The Graduate topped the theater box office. The Beatles released Sgt. Pepper's. The Monkees were Daydream Believing, and the Summer of Love was in full bloom in San Francisco. In Bloomington, the Indiana football team was coming off a one-win season and gearing up for John Ponce's third year as the head coach. And there were no expectations that the season would turn out so rosy.
Oh, golly, I'm not sure that anybody foresaw what we were able to do in 1967. I certainly didn't.
The Hoosiers had gone just 1-8-1 in 1966 and finished in 9th place in the Big Ten for a second straight season. But waiting in the wings were 3 rising sophomores who would help transform the offense and propel the Hoosiers to their one and only Rose Bowl appearance. Indiana unveiled a spread option utilizing quarterback Harry Gonzo, tailback John Eisenbarger, and flanker Jade Butcher, none of whom could play in 1966 when freshmen were ineligible.
At the most 2 weeks before the opener, maybe just a Saturday before the opener, that he finally decided to go with Gonzo and put Eisenbarger tailback. Well, he's learning a whole new position back there. But what he did was give him a quarterback back then. So that added that third option where he could take the pitch and pull back and pass. And, boy, that was dynamic with Butcher.
The Hoosiers also had a veteran defense back, anchored by linebacker Ken Kazmarek. Ponce switched Doug Cruzan from offensive tackle, where he would eventually start for the Miami Dolphins in the NFL, to defensive tackle, and changed from a 5-3 formation to a 4-4.
The cocky sophomores of the 67 team got all the media attention, but believe me, the really good athletes that won more than half of the games were on the defense, and they were seniors and juniors that were just spectacular athletes and great teammates.
Indiana opened the season with wins over Kentucky and Kansas by a combined 5 points. Then came a 20-7 win at Illinois, sealed by a Kazmarek interception return for a touchdown.
I can remember Pont coming and jumping on this pile in the end zone, and he hadn't shaven that day, and his beard was rubbing against my neck. But on the way back from that game, we got into Bloomington. We stopped and had dinner and came into Bloomington, and people were starting to get enthused.
5 weeks later, the Hoosiers were still undefeated and number 5 in the nation.
Everything seemed so improbable, and the correlation with this year was the national disbelief that Indiana really is a legitimate team.
But a loss at Minnesota ended the perfect season. Indiana responded with a 19-14 win over number 3 Purdue to claim a share of the Big Ten title. 7 of the Hoosiers' 9 wins were by a touchdown or less, and 8 of the games were decided in the final 4 minutes, earning them the nickname the Cardiac Kids.
3 points, 2 points. Geez, Michigan State, 14-13. So it was one of those that you just held your breath and everybody played. And end result was good.
Good enough to earn them a trip to Pasadena, California, where they would face number 1 Southern Cal. In the days leading up to the game, the Hoosiers were more tourists than football players. They went to a theme park, took part in photo ops, banquets, and even had an eating contest with the Trojans at Lowry Steakhouse.
It was like going to Disneyland. I mean, we actually went to Disneyland and interacted with USC, but it was like you're going out there for a party, and it's very difficult to get ready for a team, especially about a month after the end of the season.
And they were facing a talented Trojan team that had 5 players selected in the first round of the 1968 NFL Draft, and that didn't include star running back O.J. Simpson, who was only a junior.
So they were loaded. That was a great football team, but we held them pretty good. Surprisingly, we really did.
We attacked them rather than letting them attack us on offense. We did a lot of blitzing, a lot of gap filling, because we wanted to kind of make sure that OJ didn't have a lot of running.
Simpson still finished with 128 yards on 28 carries and scored both of USC's touchdowns. His first put the Trojans up 7-0 in the first quarter. Indiana got a 27-yard field goal in the second, but the Hoosiers never found the end zone. And then it was over. Southern Cal won 14-3. Indiana has never made it back to the Rose Bowl, but as a member of the IU Board of Trustees, Gonzo has had a bird's eye view of what the current Hoosiers have accomplished under head coach Tom Allen.
I think it's just been remarkable to be able to watch how this team has gelled, and I genuinely hope that they can capture this moment and keep it and expand upon it, because that would really be fantastic for IU.
Even if it means the 1967 team has to share some of the glory.
It was kind of probably like when I was there, and all you heard about was the 1945 team. Now it's the 1967 team. What I would like is to get more teams, and we can start quoting a whole bunch of different dates.
For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Pat Bean.
This year's Indiana football team will face Ole Miss in the Outback Bowl on Saturday. Kickoff 12:30 p.m. and the game will be broadcast on ABC. And Evansville Zoo claims to be the first to naturally breed an endangered species of salamander. As Indiana Public Broadcasting's Rebecca Thiel reports, the eastern Hellbender's population has declined in Indiana due to water pollution and habitat loss.
Snot otter, mud dog, Allegheny alligator, old lasagna sides. Those are just a few names for the Hellbender. It's the largest salamander in the U.S. and known for the wrinkly skin on its sides. About the only place it's found in Indiana today is the Blue River watershed, which covers parts of Clark, Crawford, Floyd, Harrison, and Washington counties. Though other zoos have bred Hellbenders artificially, Mesker Park Zoo claims to be the first to breed the eastern Hellbender naturally. Rod Williams is the principal investigator for Hellbender research at Purdue University. He says being able to breed them naturally opens up more opportunities to bring Hellbender populations back.
Rear those eggs in captivity and then use that essentially as a reservoir to release animals back into the wild throughout the historic range here in Indiana.
Lee Ramone is the assistant animal curator at Mesker Park Zoo. She says Mesker hopes to breed younger Hellbenders in the future to have a more viable batch of eggs. As of early December, only one egg from this first clutch has survived.
Hopefully in the next few weeks it should be hatching out. So we're obviously monitoring that really closely and awaiting every step as proud parents do.
Landowners can help Hellbenders by working to keep fertilizer, pesticides, oil, leaves, and pet waste out of streams and storm drains. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Rebecca Thiel.
Coming up next on Indiana Newsdesk. 2020 was a year unlike many others due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Ahead, we look back on a year marked by protests, elections, and much more. And Indiana University is wrapping up several renovation projects at the Musical Arts Center. Ahead, what upgrades were made to the 50-year-old facility? These stories and more right here on Indiana Newsdesk.
Stay close to Indiana Newsdesk as we trace education issues all the way from the Capitol to your child's classroom. So many topics that arise each year in the State House affect what happens every day in the schoolhouse. The WTIU News Team is committed to helping you stay up to date with the issues that affect your family's future. Keep yourself informed. Tune in to Indiana Newsdesk, your source for regional and state in-depth news.
Welcome back to Indiana Newsdesk. Now for headlines, we go over to Ethan Burks, who has the latest on this week's top stories.
Thank you, Joe. Indiana U.S. Senator Mike Braun won't say whether he'll vote to certify the Electoral College results of the 2020 presidential election when Congress meets next week. That comes after Braun's Republican colleague, Senator Josh Hawley of Missouri, announced this week he'll object to those results to force a roll call vote.
I think what I'm going to do is look at the merits of what he's got underlying his objection. And I think there will be many of us that look at that.
Braun says allegations of voter fraud shouldn't be dismissed and that doing so will lead to, quote, half the country to not accept election results. But allegations of voter fraud in the 2020 election have been thoroughly investigated by multiple levels of the government the last 2 months. Dozens of state and federal courts, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and U.S. Attorney General Bill Barr have all said there is no evidence of widespread voter fraud. Republicans are preparing to enter the legislative session with their largest supermajority since before the 2016 election. They grew their majority by 4 seats in the November election from 67 to 71. The Mike Downs Center for Indiana Politics director Andrew Downs says that gives the GOP a little bit more flexibility.
At 67, they had to worry about losing 1 or 2 members and being out of the supermajority. You add a couple more in and you can be, a little less cautious, so to speak.
But Downs says he doesn't expect the GOP to push legislation much farther to the right, if it does at all. Businesses could stand to lose billions of dollars from lawsuits related to COVID-19. The Indiana Chamber's top priority for the upcoming legislative session will be to provide businesses some protections. Business owners worry about lawsuits from employees claiming that they brought COVID-19 home from their work and infected those living with them. These so-called take-home cases rely on previous legal arguments made in asbestos litigation. The governor and legislative leaders have already voiced support for increased liability protections. The Bureau of Prisons has started vaccinating staff members and some inmates at the federal prison complex in Terre Haute, where the Justice Department carries out federal executions. More than 400 inmates at the Terre Haute Penitentiary have tested positive for the virus, including 2 men scheduled to be just days ahead of the inauguration. Attorneys for inmates Dustin Higgs and Corey Johnson say it is unsafe to carry out executions now. A federal judge has issued a stay in execution of Lisa Montgomery, who was scheduled to be executed on January 12th. Montgomery's original execution date of December 8th was postponed after both her attorneys contracted coronavirus. A judge says the federal government acted illegally in resetting Montgomery's execution since a stay was already in place after her attorneys became ill. Montgomery was convicted of killing a pregnant woman and cutting her baby out of her womb. Her legal team says she is mentally ill. And for the first time in its 50-year history, the Musical Arts Center on Indiana University Bloomington's campus is getting a makeover. Lily St. Angelo reports on the renovation projects.
Several projects at the IU Musical Arts Center are wrapping up after a busy year of renovations and improvements. Denver Reitzman, Director of Facilities for the Jacobs School of Music, gave us a look at the new features.
For years, all campuses across the country have struggled to make ends meet, especially state institutions and things. And we are being able to go back and fix a lot of the things that we had to defer at one time for lack of funding. And as funding increases and donations increase, we're able to do a lot of different things.
The seating in the state-of-the-art music hall was replaced for the first time since the building was built nearly 50 years ago. Reitzman said seating usually has a 20 to 25-year life. The renovations also quadrupled the amount of seating for wheelchair-bound audience members and made it possible for people in wheelchairs to access the stage from the audience seating. Other accessibility improvements were made, including the installation of automatic door openers and motion-activated sinks and toilets in the auditorium's bathrooms. Reitzman said the next project will be the expansion of the elevator so it can carry a gurney in moments of emergency. Improving safety was another main goal of the renovations. More fire alarms and emergency lights were installed all around the building, and a newly made fire-retardant curtain was installed on the stage. Reitzman said the timing of the project was not purposefully lined up with the cancellation of all in-person shows because of COVID-19, but it made it easier to schedule the work. IU's Capital Planning Department made the call that the MAC's renovations needed to be a priority.
They have to prioritize where the most benefit goes for the money at the time and who needs it the most. And so it just happened to, some of these things happened to us this year.
The Well House Society, a group of donors that are a part of the IU Foundation, funded the renovation. As the man who has done everything from changing light bulbs to overseeing the construction of new buildings for the music school, Reitzman is proud of the students and faculty who work within the walls of the buildings he manages. He thinks of the MAC as the jewel of IU's campus, a building that deserves the renovations it received.
They can see any person that comes here and this is their first time. The seating experience will be great, the lighting will be great, the sets are beautiful, the performances, it's just phenomenal, the talent our students have and our faculty have.
Reitzman will sleep better knowing the faculty, students, and patrons who work in and visit the MAC will be safer, more comfortable and more able to access all of the music that will once again ring through the hall when COVID precautions end. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Lily St. Angelo.
And that's all for this week's headlines. Back to you, Joe.
All right, thank you, Ethan. A group of volunteers is working to get a Columbus icon back to the city. Mitch Legan has more on Atterbury-Bakalar Air Museum's Project Charlie 119.
It's been nearly half a century since a plane like Charlie was in Columbus.
I like to say it's like building a house. We've been at this roughly about 6 months putting it back together, and so it's starting to look like something.
Charlie is a Fairfield C-119, also called the Flying Boxcar. From 1942 to 1970, Columbus was home to an Air Force base. Pilots training for World War II, Korea, and Vietnam were stationed there.
To load the cargo in here, they would open the doors up, and you can actually see it's like a loading dock right there.
The C-119 was a commonly used transport plane. It carried troops and cargo during the Korean conflict and Vietnam War. In the 1950s, you could often look up and see them patrolling the skies above Columbus.
Into the mid-90s, there were people that tried to work on getting a full-size C-119 here, and they just couldn't quite get it pulled off.
That is until Taylor and the group of volunteers that run the Air Museum found a listing for Charlie in Wyoming and pulled the trigger to bring the plane back to Columbus to display. But the last time Charlie was in the air was 1990, so the group hired someone to break the plane down and drive it from northern Wyoming to Columbus, piece by piece. The crew spent the last 6 months putting Charlie back together. But there's still a ways to go.
We got to keep the birds out. We got to figure out how to keep the birds out and yet not take away from the aesthetic value of the plane and the display.
The pandemic has unsurprisingly caused some hiccups for the project, and the hope is that if everything continues according to plan, the plane will be fully refurbished and outside the Atterbury-Bakalar Air Museum by the end of next year.
I think this is going to be a great opportunity for students and the youth of Columbus to be able to come out here and interact with this large piece of military history from our past.
And when they say interact, they really mean interact. Museum visitors will be able to go inside the plane to learn how it works, its history, and connection to Columbus. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Mitch Legan.
Well, 2020 was a trying year for many. We take a look back at some of the biggest stories of the year.
Why are we doing that with public forests, spending our dollars, paying people to come in here and do what nature's already doing?
We do not need to prosecute anybody for possession of marijuana. No!
When you went in there, it made something in your heart open up where you thought, God, I want to be a part of this, and there needs to be more downtown than just this little theater.
His courage to get in it, his wisdom to know when there wasn't a path for victory anymore.
At this time, no COVID-19 cases have been confirmed in Indiana.
I think we're serving somewhere in the neighborhood of 200 to 300 people.
I love to sew. That's my superpower, and I believe in using superpowers for good.
Can I see all of your cute faces this morning?
Being challenged to channel all of my anger into a peaceful protest, but nothing about my anger is peaceful.
It's a bit of an unfair notion to think that we can discount folks' experiences because they're unable to document the entire encounter.
There is no closure, never will be, because I won't get my daughter back.
Ain't it good to be a Hoosier?
We're going to compete. We're going to fight. Good Lord willing, we're going to find a way. Keep proving everybody wrong.
You have to worry about where your next meal is coming from, where you're going to sleep.
I would be interested to know what a U.S. attorney thinks about executing a person who was a victim of sex trafficking.
We can't
I
stop
like being
now.
part of something big that brings joy to a lot of people.
It's being part of something bigger than yourself.
And as always, much more online at WTIUnews.org. Happy New Year.
Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by Smithville Fiber Internet, streaming TV, home security and automation in Southern Indiana. More information at smithville.com. Maller Grodner Attorneys, providing legal services to clients and the community. Understanding, expertise, results. Bloomington and Indianapolis. LawMG.com. IU Alumni Association, connecting IU's network of alumni and sharing the Indiana spirit through scholarships, advocacy, and volunteerism. Alumni.iu.edu. IU Center for Rural Engagement, extending IU Bloomington resources to improve Hoosier lives in partnership with communities and organizations. Rural.indiana.edu. And by WTIU members. Thank you.